Hey, my name is Caleb. I'm one of the directors of Beautiful Response, and one of the questions that we've gotten frequently and often is what happens to the kids in Uganda when they age out of the program? What happens when they turn 18 or finish school? Where do they end up? It's a question that we've gotten from the very beginning, and it's a question that we've sort of been asking ourselves along the way. This August, we're going to have our first kids enter university. And so I thought it would be a good point in the life of our organization and in the life of RUHU to explain kind of the education system, the process of sort of that the kids go through, why tuition changes, and explain some of the policies that we've sort of gleaned and picked up as we've worked with Patrick and William, and now with the 3 social workers that they have on staff at RUHU. So I'm just going to kind of talk through what they've told us is their policy on education and schooling, and hopefully it'll give you a better sense of where the tuition money is going, what you can be praying for as the kids enter different stages in their lives, and sort of the progression. So in Uganda, kids start out in baby class, top class is kind of pre-K and kindergarten is what they call them, and then P1 through P7 is elementary school, primary 1 up through primary 7. And in Uganda, technically, there's free primary education for all students. Unfortunately, there aren't schools everywhere, like geographically close enough. And also, unfortunately, a lot of teachers aren't paid, or they have to wait an incredibly long time to get paid. And so they can be fairly unreliable. And it's a free education, but there's still costs for books and shoes and uniform that a lot of kids can't pay. So all the kids at RUHU go to private schools, and one of the things we do on every trip is just go to each of those schools and make sure that the schools are high quality. In the last few years, RUHU has started its own primary school, and so kids from baby class up to P7 are now going to the RUHU school, and teacher Jackie is there, and the staff has grown to over 15 people on staff at that school now, so they're kind of doing education in-house, and they're scoring really well on their exams, their national exams, which is awesome. So we're super proud of that. But at RUHU, up through P7 is required. It's not optional. You know, their job as kids is to go to school, and so we want to provide whatever support they need in order to go to school, but it's not optional. They have to go up to school through P7. And in primary 7, the kids take really important exams that are taken across the nation. And so you can kind of see where your school is doing against other schools, how the students are doing, and how well you do in your P7 exams dictates the kind of secondary school you can get into. So from a very early age, education is pretty competitive. And so in primary 7, most of the kids will go to boarding school, and that's just in order so that they can study, kind of be committed full time to their education for that entire year. So it's a tiring year for the kids, and they work so hard. It's also why the cost of tuition bumps up in P7 significantly, because you're paying not just for tuition anymore. You're paying for room and board and all the meals, and so it becomes expensive in P7. After P7, there's secondary school, which is S1 through S4, secondary 1 through secondary 4. And our expectation is that all kids will go to secondary school. I mean, it's the equivalent of high school. And so unless there are extenuating circumstances, the assumption is that you will go to secondary school. And the studying gets even more intense, and almost all secondary schools are boarding schools still. So it's kind of like college life for these kids starting in S1, and academically it's really challenging. A lot of them struggle their first couple years to adapt to the change, and then we see them improve significantly in S3 and S4, and often surprise us with their exam scores in S4. So there's definitely a learning curve for a lot of the kids as they enter secondary school, and the costs again are similar to P7 because they're boarding school students, and so the costs have gone up. And we've had kids do well enough on their P7 exams to get into international schools. Because of the national exam system, all the schools are ranked in Uganda, so you can kind of tell how good of a school you go to by their national ranking. And so we've got we proud to have a few kids in top 10 schools, and then some that end up in schools that aren't in the top half of schools, and we're proud of them as well. And those schools still provide an opportunity, a pathway for those kids to figure out what their career is, how they want to enter the job force. So it's not like the opportunities end for the kids who don't score that well. There's still opportunities for them. And so we really encourage kids to go through school S1, S2, S3, S4. And it's really rigorous, and occasionally a kid will not be able to handle the academic side of it or the emotional side of it for any number of reasons. And our social workers take a look at the scores of each kid, see which classes are getting close to the fail line, and work with the kids to provide tutoring so that they can hopefully improve their scores, or if it's emotional support they need, which is often the case, trying to figure out what these kids are dealing with and going through. And it's often in secondary school and high school when, like kids in the United States, but for these kids as well, where a lot of the trauma that they've experienced as a child begins to really affect them as they develop social relationships. And so the social workers and the staff of RUHU try to provide opportunities when the kids are home to work through some of that, to talk through what's going on, and to, like any high school student, there's behaviors that we want to nip in the bud, that we want to just encourage them to make different choices. And so that's a constant prayer request. When we started Beautiful Response, our average age was a third grader. And, now our average student's in high school. And so the issues we're dealing with are a lot more adult and a lot more difficult. And, early on it was, you could write a check to cover, if there wasn't food, money can solve that. But some of these problems, just require prayer and relationships. And so that's a constant prayer request. So we rarely allow a child to drop out of secondary school. It's got to be extenuating circumstances. A high school diploma, is so important to get just for their own security, and then securing jobs as they move forward. During S4, secondary 4, essentially the senior year of high school, there's a discernment period where the students kind of work with the social workers, and they work with William and Auntie Ellen, and they kind of start to think about what's going to happen after S4. Sometimes there's a vocational program they want to enter into. Sometimes there are certificate programs. Some kids want to go, if possible, enter the workforce right away. So those are all possible routes. There's also secondary 5 and secondary 6, which are called A-level, advanced level courses. And S5 and S6, there's exams again in secondary 4. You take another set of national exams, and if you do well in those, then you can move on to secondary 5 and secondary 6, which are really preparation years for university. And so not all students need them, but if you want to do an engineering degree or be a doctor or a lawyer, then you do need to do S5 and S6 to prepare you for the coursework that you're going to face in university. It's the most direct path to some of those college degrees. Not every student wants to do that. Not every student scores well enough to do that if they want to. And so in those cases, there are certificate programs like there are in the United States and other places where you can do a certificate in computer science that will prepare you for the workforce. And then if you do decide, okay, I've got this certificate in computer science, now I want to also begin to do some coursework that might give me a bachelor's degree, a bachelor's of arts or a bachelor's of science in computer science. You can always go that route, but S5 and S6 are the most direct routes to prepare students for university degrees. We have a lot of kids that enter certificate programs because they know they want to be a mechanic, they want to be an electrician. The smart choice in that case is not to go into S5 and S6, is to get into a vocational training program or a certificate program where they can pursue that dream. And we do have some kids, the kids who are now entering university. I think we have 6 entering university in August, and those kids have just finished S5 and S6, and S6, you take exams again that sort of place you for what university you're going to go to. Makerere University in Uganda is the biggest one. It's in Kampala. Chambogo is another university that a couple kids are going to go to. And each of these levels, the cost goes up, the rigor goes up, and so now in university, actually some of the secondary schools are more expensive than university, but it all just depends. We're a small enough organization. RUHU is a small enough organization with a dedicated enough staff that they're still able to work with each child, and so, the flat sponsorship fee model that worked when we had third graders, doesn't work as well. But we're still trying to figure out other sources of revenue to make, whatever the hopes and dreams are of these students, we want to make them possible. So some kids do a certificate program, some kids go on to S5 and S6, and then after that, you can enter the job market, or you can probably go on to university. So I just wanted to sort of lay all that out there. It's kind of if you're used to the United States education system, it's kind of a confusing confusing path, and some of the nomenclature is different and everything. So I just wanted to lay that all out there for you. Hopefully it's helpful to understand sort of where your child is at. If you are unsure what grade your sponsor child is at, you can email Laura at beautifulresponse.org, and she can tell you what grade they're currently in. And so you'll have a sense of kind of where they're at in their academic journey at RUHU. And we continue to covet your prayers, and thank you for your financial gifts. And let me know, Caleb at beautifulresponse.org, if you have any questions about this. Thanks. Have a great day.